Open up your Bibles to John chapter 6, verse 1. John chapter 6, verse 1. If you want to cheat, it's on the cover of your bulletin, but you're not cheaters. You all brought your Bible. You got Bibles in front of you. My parents have lived in Muscle Shoals since 1999. And they live in one of the, I'm not trying to brag, but it's one of the top subdivisions in the whole area. And there were 6 lots in this subdivision that never sold. And one day, about 10 years ago, Dad and I were driving around, and I asked Dad why he thought that was. And Dad introduced me to this concept called the HOA. But what it was the lots were kind of a little bit strangely shaped. And then there were offsets, and there were ordinances, and there were regulations, and then there were power lines and utility lines, and then there was the HOA stuff. And what it was basically the constraints that were on the lots limited the housing options, let's put it that way. But then, about 5 years ago, all but one of those lots had homes on and families living in them, and they didn't relax the HOA stuff, all right? But people wanted to live in that neighborhood so bad that they were willing to get creative. Now, admittedly, one of the lots does actually stink. Okay, somebody needs to buy that, and the people on either side of it need to buy it and split it, and increase the lights of their side yards. But this buildable area was not conventional, and they had to change their thinking when they designed the home and then when they built it. Basically, what that means is looking at all the regulations and offsets and HOA stuff. They had to believe in the impossible, these families did, in order to build their house. And I think more often than we do, we need to think like those families about our spiritual lives. We need to be believers in the impossible. You know, we worship the one true God, the one who does all things, the one who does the impossible, as it were. And all too often, we worship another God, who I'm going to call the God of what's possible. All right? Now look on the cover of your bulletin. All right? It says the God of the possible. One of my old seminary professors told me to always name the sermon title right. I messed up. I want you to take a pen, because I don't want them things leaving here and embarrassing us. Deborah did the bulletin right. I messed up making the title of this sermon. That title of that sermon ought to be The God of What's Possible. So take a pen and scratch out the and put in what's. The God of what's possible. I'm going to go through John chapter 6, verses 1 through 15. I'm going to show you what I mean. I'm going to piecemeal this. But so keep your finger on your Bible or the cover of your bulletin wherever you're looking at the Word of God today. This is John chapter 6, verse 1. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish festival of Passover was near. This is the word of God for the people of God, and all God's people say. Amen. What is about to happen is a miracle. It is called the feeding of the 5,000. Basically, what happens, if you've never heard of it or read it, Jesus feeds a whole bunch of people with very little food. And this miracle takes place near a town called Bethsaida on the northern side of the Sea of Galilee. The name Bethsaida in Hebrew means house of fishing or fishing house. So this is a fishing community by the sea. And Jesus arrives there. He's a few miles outside of town. And a whole bunch of people are following him. And John specifically tells us why they are following Jesus. Quote, because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. They were interested, folks, in the spectacle. They were interested in the show and the physical ministry of Jesus. The spiritual truths at this point were secondary to them. Why? Because spiritual truth always involves difficulty. Those truths change us when we hear them. They change those whom we touch, if we listen. And so Jesus goes to the mountainside. Is he going to talk? They're asking themselves. Is he going to do the magic Jesus Mojo Healy stuff again? They don't know. But they're coming to hear him. And then Jesus, God the Son, with foreknowledge of future events, takes a seat on the side of the mountain and says basically nothing. And waits for things to unfold. He knows he needs to meet their physical need, but something bigger is at stake. He has to teach them something. Now, we don't like to hear that Jesus tests us. I don't like to hear it. I especially don't like it when I'm counseling somebody who is absolutely convinced that God is testing them and that they're failing. Now look, God might be testing you, but usually people are just going through hard times. God's not testing them. In my experience, about 95% of the time, God is not testing you. Circumstances are. God's there loving on you and hugging on you and getting you through whatever mess you're in. That's who he is. And it's gotten to the point, if I'm having difficulty, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I almost never assume that God is testing me. If I have my head on right, I'll ask, all right, now, Lord, what now? Usually I don't. I just panic. I don't know about you. Anybody else panic when they're in a mess? Okay. However, sometimes God does test us, and that's hard to hear. The Bible does say that. Jesus, God the Son, is testing not so much the crowd, he's testing the disciples. This is John 6, verse 5 and 6. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for all these people to eat?" He only asked to test him, for he was already had in mind what he was going to do. So Jesus tests Philip. And this whole thing is weird. He asks Philip where they're going to buy bread to feed all these people. Why does he ask Philip? Philip and Peter and Andrew are all from Bethsaida. He asked where to buy bread, not how much. A lot of people miss that because of Philip's answer. You only ask of someone where they're going to do something if that person is from there. You're going to go to Florence, you're going to say, Trav, where do you get the best ice cream? Trowbridge's. Okay? Same thing. If he was interested in asking about money, Jesus would have asked Judas. Judas was the money man. But Jesus knows what he's doing. He saw Nathanael under a fig tree, and he knows people's hearts, and he knew the whole story of the Samaritan woman, and he knows me, and he knows you. And if that makes you afraid, push through that, because his grace is on the other side. His mercy is on the other side, and his love is right here, folks. He is testing Philip to reveal to the rest of them how much, well, they're grasping or not grasping what he's teaching. Whether they understand his purpose, whether they understand his power, and whether they understand his mission. So how do these disciples respond? This is John 6, verse 7 and following. Philip answered him, "It'd take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite." Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. How will that go among so many?" Now all the disciples were listening. Forget the crowd for a moment. Consider yourself among the disciples and listen to Jesus. Philip gets all, for lack of a better phrase, engineering on us here. Okay? He starts thinking math. He's not thinking geography. He starts thinking about money. He starts thinking about how exactly he's going to hit up all the bakers in the old hometown to cook enough pita bread for these people to have a bite. He is in full-blown nerd mode, and you can see him with the little thing. Jesus, by my calculations, there are approximately so many people here. We need 200 silver coins in order to buy bread enough for all these people to have one bite. Okay? That's what he's doing. And Jesus had asked him, where? Not how much. And Philip replies, how much? How many times do we have Jesus before us asking a question and we answer the wrong question? How many times do we give Jesus the right answer to the wrong question? Philip gives the literal, calculated response. Why? Because his thinking is conventional. He didn't see how they were going to buy all the bread. In other words, he didn't think it was possible. In other words, Philip was worshiping the God of what's possible. And you may be there. You may have been there. I have been there, and some days I am there. And then you got Andrew. God help him, because he's Simon Peter's brother. Somehow, in all this mess, Andrew finds this kid. And I don't know what this kid's doing. I don't know what he's doing in the front of the line of that huge crowd, but he's the only one smart enough in all this bunch to bring a sack lunch. When I get to heaven, I want to meet this kid. I just want to talk to him. I mean, I want to meet Jesus, and I want to meet Paul and all these people and all this stuff. I'm going to find that kid. I'm going to say, how did you know to bring the sack lunch? But that's another sermon. Okay. He brings the sack lunch, and Andrew has got him a plan. And remember, he's Simon Peter's brother. He acts before he thinks. Okay, let me be nice about that. And at first he's extremely confident about it. How do we know that? Because in the scripture it says Andrew spoke up. When the Greek uses that phrase, when the scripture uses that phrase, it means that the person has some kind of confidence in what they're about to say. Now, Andrew says, okay, Jesus, we can feed all these people. I found this kid, he's got some food, blah, 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 blah. But then he's kind of like that guy when the car breaks down and somebody says to him, bet you can't fix that. And he says, hold my beer. And he fixes it with duct tape and spit and a paper clip and all this stuff. He tries to fix the situation like that. But he doesn't, I don't think, he's all mouth and he's all impulse. And he's coming forward with this plan. He thinks it's going to work. And sometimes people make fun of Andrew, but he's the only person there who for a moment is not intimidated by the impossible. He's got this plan. He spoke up. And then for his mouth and his jabber catches up with him, and he really looks at these 5, 10, 20,000 people. How many were there? Because the 5 just counts the women, the men, excuse me. And Andrew's confidence breaks. And he says, but how far will they go among so many? He starts worshiping the God of what's possible. And maybe you've been there, maybe you are there. But underneath the fear of Philip and Andrew and you and me, Jesus sees something. He has to, or he wouldn't respond in the way that he does. And I thank him that he does do that to this day. You got John 6:10. Jesus said, have the people sit down. And there was plenty of grass in that space. And in the location of where they think this happened, it's just absolutely gorgeous. It's just this natural amphitheater. You got the hills and then the coastline and then the lake. It's just gorgeous. There was plenty of grass in that place, and then they sat down, and about 5,000 men were there. And then Jesus took the loaves, and he gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. And he did the same with the fish. Now, Philip and Andrew were lost in their calculator, and I hope to high heaven that I'm not and you're not too. The other 10 disciples, however, are silent. They say nothing, not even Peter, who is known to run his mouth. And Jesus comes alongside them and directs them. Have the people sit down. How hard is it for 12 people to get 5, 10, 20,000 people, men and women, to sit down? Have you ever tried to get 100 church folk to sit down? How long does something like that take? The men probably sat down with their families around them. And then Jesus takes out the loaves. And he gives thanks. And the prayer is probably something like this. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. It's a standard Jewish mealtime blessing for thousands of years. And notice that it's Jesus who begins the distribution. This is likely helped along by the disciples. Have you ever been to a football game? Like a big one. Can you imagine feeding 20,000 people with 12 concession stand operators? This is going to take a while. The lesson here, though, is that each of us is fed directly and spiritually from Jesus himself. He's not the God of what's possible. Jesus is the God of the impossible. John 6:12. When they'd all eaten enough, he said to his disciples, gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted. And so they gathered them, and they filled 12 baskets, because each disciple's carrying a basket, with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. It was impossible. A sack lunch feeds a crowd of 10 or 20,000 people, but it happened. In spite of all those, in spite of limited resources, it happened. They were fed until they were satisfied. There were scraps left over, and each disciple goes around and collects the scraps. Now notice all the fish are gone. Fish must have been good. Only the bread scraps are left. The baskets are filled. The test is over. This is who Jesus is. This is his power. Calculations don't matter, because this is the power of God. The God of the impossible is with us. Now, unfortunately, and I'm not going to read this part of the scripture, but the crowd gets the wrong idea. They see this miracle and they want to make him king of Israel right then by force. And so Jesus gets out of there. What the crowd didn't understand, and what I hope that we do understand, is that the miracle is a physical manifestation of a spiritual truth. The kingdom of Jesus is a spiritual kingdom, and Jesus acts in his time, not ours. The point is we don't need to be worried about what's possible. We're not limited by the tyrannical God of what's possible, because the God of the impossible is with us, and he will provide. Now, I might have the slightest inkling of your struggles. You might think that you are nothing, like those lots in that subdivision. Now, what I said about that 6th lot that I had was junk. Don't listen to that part. Okay, that was just for comedy. Okay? You might think that you're like that lot in the subdivision. You're boxed in by rules. You're boxed in by sin. You're boxed in by pain. You're boxed in by hurt. And there's no place where the Lord can build your spiritual house. You might think it's impossible that Jesus would be in your life or fit in your life. You might think it's impossible for you to get out of the spiritual mess that you are in. But we do not worship, folks, the God of what's possible. We worship the God of the impossible. Folks, each and every single one of us, and don't get a big head because when I say this, but just, Jesus died for you. And at some level, I don't want anybody to get prideful about this, but at some level, because Jesus died for everyone, at some level, each of us are too important to remain in the pain and the boundaries of that evil God of what's possible. So we got to change our thinking. Be transformed, Scripture says, by the renewing of your mind. Let Jesus build that spiritual home for you. He can make it fit. He might be able to get that dadgum HOA out of the way. He watches it. Sometimes you think that's not possible, don't you? He watches over the whole world. That old children's song. He's got the whole world in his hands. He watches over you, and he watches over me. And every other God in this world will tell you what's possible and make you worship it. But Jesus will do the impossible for you, in you, through you. There is no pit that you can fall in that he will not be able to lift you out of with his mighty right hand. And when the circumstances of life are beyond control, I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's death or imminent death or addiction or cancer or prodigal sons or prodigal daughters or babies or parents or frenemies or jobs or deadlines or anxiety or the terrible prison of not being able to forgive yourself. When it's all out of your control, when it's not possible, that is the best time. Actually, every time is. But it is the best time to stop what you're doing and give it all to the God of the impossible. He's not going to turn his back on you. Now, sometimes he saves us in the pain. Usually, he sits with us through the pain. Why? Because that's what you do with someone you love. And we can trust him to provide. Often it's not the way we want, but it's the way we need. He is the God of the impossible. Now look, we're going to have a prayer time in just a minute. But if you need provision, if you are alone and need him for the first time or the 10th millionth time or whatever, the altar is open. Heaven's gate is open. Wait a minute, that was a cult in Texas. But you know what I mean. Heaven is open. The curtain in the temple is open. I can pray with you. There's some good people in this room that have come forward and pray with you too. You can drop your calculators, you can change your thinking, and you can give it all to the God of the impossible. Let's pray.